September 1983, Moscow. The clock reads 0014. Inside an underground command center, silence, then alarms tear through the air. A red warning flashes on the screen. Launch, intercontinental missile. United States, Soviet Union. Protocol demands an immediate retaliatory nuclear strike. Hundreds of millions could be dead within minutes. But let's start from the beginning. September 1983. The Cold War is at its breaking point. Two superpowers with their fingers on the nuclear trigger, and no one is sure who will press it first. In the past few weeks, the world has lived in a state of near panic. At the start of the month, Soviet fighter jets shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007. There were 269 people on board, including a member of the US Congress. Washington is furious. Moscow is isolated. Television stays silent, but in the corridors of the Kremlin, there is quiet panic. The Americans respond with a massive exercise. Able Archer, a simulation of a nuclear strike. Soviet intelligence doesn't see it as a drill, but as cover for a real attack. The generals prepare for the worst. Every missile is aimed west. Every signal could be the last. Moscow suburbs, Serpukhov, 15, deep underground, behind thick concrete walls, the main hub of the early warning system. Oko hums to life. There are no windows here, just the low drone of fans, the faint metallic tang in the air, and hundreds of screens pulsing with green lines. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov takes the night shift, 44 years old, tired but alert. The son of an aircraft engineer and a nurse from Leningrad, he's not a hero, just a man who hates being wrong. On his desk, a thermos of cold tea, an open duty log, a pencil, and a direct line to high command. If he dials that number, within 5 minutes, missiles will be in the air. There will be no turning back. Petrov watches the monitors. Everything is calm. The satellites send stable signals. Operators trade short, clipped phrases. Typewriters click softly in the dark. The shift begins like hundreds before it. None of them know that in a few minutes, this room will become the center of the world. Silence. Even the air conditioners sound too loud. Petrov opens the logbook and writes a note. 0014. Shift commenced. Above him, layers of concrete and a sleeping Moscow. Far beyond that, in orbit, satellites glide through the void, scanning every flash of heat, every spark of light. They have one purpose: to detect the first sign of a nuclear strike. The underground control room glows dimly, bathed in the greenish light of 1,000 flickering pixels. Cables snake along the walls. Red bulbs blink like the heartbeat of machines. Every sound is heavy, mechanical, as if the room itself is breathing. This is Oko, the Soviet Union's eye in the sky, the centerpiece of their apocalypse protocol. It went operational just a few months ago. Its mission: to detect a nuclear missile launch from US territory before the rockets disappear into the clouds. High above Earth, satellites scan half the planet, watching for every flash of heat, every glint of sunlight, every false alarm. At Petrov's console, the central interface where all data converges, on the screen, a coordinate grid dotted with flickering points on the panel in front of him. Buttons labeled with a single word each: launch, report, control. It's all very simple. One command, and the sequence begins. Once triggered, there's no turning back. A few operators sit nearby, all of them focused, silent. The glow of the monitors is the only light on their face. Each of them understands. Mistakes here aren't measured in percentages. They're measured in millions of lives. Petrov steps closer to the main screen. It shows a map of North America. Along the edge of the continent, a small marker flashes, a solar reflection. Nothing unusual. These flashes happen every day. He takes a sip from his cold cup of tea, jots a note in the logbook, a quick glance at the clock. 001432. The shift has only just begun. And then, in the steady hum of machines, came the sound that changed everything. A sharp alarm. First one, then another, then a third. The screens began flashing red. Across the main display, one word lit up in bold, blinding letters: Launch USA. An operator barely has time to hit the confirmation button. Petrov snaps his head up. On the map, a bright flare over a US Air Force base in Montana. Then a second, a third, a fifth. The room grows colder, as if fear itself drops the temperature. No one speaks. Everyone holds their breath. They all know, if this isn't a false alarm, the missiles are already in the air. Petrov has no more than 12 minutes to decide whether to report this to Soviet command as the start of a nuclear war. He stares at the screen, then at the phone. Just one word into that receiver, and Soviet missiles will launch. But he doesn't rush. The sirens fade. Only the hum of the air system remains, and the pounding of hearts loud enough to be felt even in silence. On the screen, a red message blinks. Launch confirmed. 5 missiles in the air. All eyes turn to Petrov. He's the only one with the authority to make the call. He sits at the console, cold metal beneath his hands, red lights pulsing around him, the sharp scent of hot electronics. Everything narrows to a single point, a finger that must not tremble. According to protocol, he must act immediately. Pick up the phone. Report to command. Launch confirmed. In 3 minutes, Soviet missiles will rise from their silos. In 20, cities across half the planet will be in flames. Petrov knows the system isn't built to doubt. He leans toward the monitor. On the screen, 5 flight paths, arcing from the US toward the Soviet Union. He double-checks the data. No confirmation from ground-based radar. No alerts from interceptor systems. Only a satellite image. 5 missiles. That's not a war. That's something's wrong. His voice is barely above a whisper. But in the silence, it hits like thunder. The officers around him freeze. Everyone waits. Will he pick up the phone or not? For a moment, he closes his eyes. In his mind, the image of his wife, his son. Right now, they're likely asleep in their apartment outside Moscow. If he's wrong, they'll wake up for only a second before the world disappears. Sweat runs down his temples. His fingers clutch a pen, then let it go. Seconds stretch like minutes. The clock reads 00:1943. Less than 12 minutes remain until a possible impact. Petrov takes a breath, looks back at the screen, and says quietly but firmly, "It's a system error. Do not report the launch." Silence. No one moves. The officers don't understand. He's just broken a direct order, violated official protocol, defied the logic of the entire military machine. He is alone. Alone against the system. Alone against the nuclear paranoia of the entire world. Petrov sets down his headset, slowly writes in the logbook. False alarm. Cause. Satellite optical error. No one says a word. Everyone waits. All eyes are locked on the main screen. Red numbers continue counting down. Minutes separating them from the possible end of the world. 00:21:03. If the missiles are real, they're already in the air. Less than 9 minutes remain. Petrov sits motionless, hand resting on the phone. His eyes never leave the screen. One of the younger operators whispers, barely audible. "Maybe we should confirm the launch?" Petrov doesn't answer. His gaze is steady, but inside, a storm is raging. If he's wrong, American warheads will strike Moscow in minutes. He'll be the man who failed to save his country, but if the system is wrong, his decision will save billions. 00:23:27. Petrov stands up. The officers watch him, eyes fixed, not blinking. 00:27:00. 15 minutes have passed since the alarm first went off. By every calculation, the missiles should have hit by now. Moscow is still standing. The silence breaks. A faint sigh from someone in the room. One officer lowers his head into his hands. Another wipes sweat from his forehead. Petrov leans over the logbook and slowly writes, "False alarm confirmed. No attack." He signs his name and places a final period. For a moment, it feels like even the machines exhale. The monitors fade back to calm green. No applause, no congratulations. Petrov lifts his gaze, and in his eyes is something deeper than exhaustion. He knows no one will ever know what he just did. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe never. The next morning, nothing had changed. The world carried on as usual. Buses rolled out on schedule. Newspapers printed political statements. Television talked about harvests and space. No one knew that just hours before dawn, humanity had stood on the edge of annihilation. At Serpukhov 15, life returned to routine as well. The shift ended. Exhausted officers drifted out like shadows, saying nothing. Petrov quietly handed in the duty log. No one said thank you. No one shook his hand. On the contrary, they pointed to a line in the protocol, unconfirmed decision made without authorization from command. Violation of procedure. He could have received a medal. Instead, he got a report. A few days later, he was called in for clarification. In the office sat a group of stern officers, all with the same rigid expressions. One of them asked, "Why didn't you follow orders?" Petrov answered quietly, "Because I chose to double-check, and the mistake wasn't human." They said nothing, just wrote something down in a file, and that was the end of it. No thanks, no recognition, no medal. Petrov left the military. He lived in a small apartment outside Moscow, just another gray 9-story building. His life became quiet, almost colorless. He grew tomatoes on the windowsill, tinkered with an old radio that picked up nothing but static. Sometimes he'd sit by the window, listening to the children playing in the courtyard, children who had no idea how close they had once come to the end. He never spoke about that night, not even to those closest to him, because to him, it wasn't a heroic act. He believed he had simply been doing his job, but fate had other plans. 1998. 15 years had passed. American historians, sifting through declassified documents, stumbled upon a report labeled False Launch Incident. The name in the footnote, Lieutenant Colonel S. E. Petrov. When journalists tracked him down in Korolyov, just outside Moscow, he answered the door wearing a bathrobe and holding a cup of cold tea. He had no idea why they were there. And when they told him people were calling him the man who saved the world, he chuckled softly. The world? I just didn't press the button. For the first time in over a decade, the world heard his name. Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world. The irony? He never sought any of it. Not fame, not money, not titles.